Welcome back to Brainstorm Buddies, where we talk about all things magic and raise money for a good cause. I'm Mtgnerdgirl, a full-time content creator.
And I'm Melissa DeTora. I'm a senior game designer at Wizards of the Coast working on Magic the Gathering.
And today we're going to be talking about some tips and tricks for those of you guys who maybe started playing Magic during Arena, during COVID, and maybe don't have as much experience either with competitive gameplay or paper gameplay. But first, I want to tell you guys that all funds from ad revenue or the thank you donation button goes to the National Abortion Fund. So if you guys want to help support that, make sure you guys share this video with your friends, tweet at it, all sorts of good stuff, and that would be going to a wonderful cause. All right, Melissa, so if you had to choose one piece of advice for a person who has never competed at a Grand Prix before, now that we're starting to see the return of these paper Magic tournaments that everybody can go to, what would be your one piece of advice for competitive gameplay? Number one.
Yeah, so I think my number one is don't be scared of judges. Judges are there to help everybody, and they're super important people, and they're there to make everybody have a good experience. And a lot of players they think judges are there to get you in trouble, and that's just not true. And calling judges is something that everybody should be doing when simple mistakes happen, and be comfortable around judges. They're customer service experts. They're there to help you.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. Judges are fantastic. I call judge on myself. I call judges for brief questions. Another thing that you guys can do if you don't quite understand how a card works or how an interaction will happen, call a judge and ask if you can step away from the table. And you can discuss a line of gameplay with a judge, and they will walk you through how something works rules-wise. Now, they won't tell you if this is good, but judges are a wonderful resource at events that are not just there to get you in trouble, like Melissa said, but they are there to help you. So if you have any questions about a rules mechanic, even during a game, you can reach out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about just calling a judge on yourself, actually. That was something that I used to do all the time. If you mess up and you try to fix it yourself, that is only going to hurt you down the line. But if you call a judge right away and explain, hey, this is what happened, the judge is just going to fix the game state and just let you guys move on.
Yeah, oftentimes it is better, even if you know you messed up and you know you messed up right away, I would still call a judge and just ask them to just verify. A lot of times they'll give you a time extension because it takes time to fix these errors. And sometimes both players miss it. It's like a game state issue where we didn't notice a trigger was supposed to go off. And it's always best to just have a judge make the final decision, so that way there's no awkwardness at the table.
For sure. And I guess another thing to point out is judges are humans, and they sometimes make mistakes as well. Ooh. So one option that you always have when you call a judge and you might not agree with their ruling is you can appeal to the head judge. This is not something that will happen too often, especially at higher level competitive events where the judge quality is much higher. They're held to a very high standard.
Yeah.
But if you are feeling like something is not right, you can always say, I'd like to appeal. You can state your case to the head judge, and they'll resolve the situation for you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing. I've only had to appeal once. And, that's something that most people don't know that they can do. And I hear stories of, someone said, oh, so and such happened, and I took a game loss. And I'm like, well, did you appeal? And they were like,
what's that?
Yeah. So definitely a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to touch on for judges is also be kind to them. Don't give attitude, because that's not going to help your case. If you are rude, if you, argue, like I said, if you have a problem with their ruling, try to escalate it to the next level judge, but don't give them grief, because that is certainly not going to help you. And also, they're good people.
Yeah, it's kind of like, if you're angry at a store or at an airport, and you just start complaining to the person in charge, they're probably a lot less likely to help you when you're yelling at them. They're just humans,
Yep.
And judges are really similar. So, yeah, just be respectful. And remember, Magic is a game. We're all trying to have fun. So just try and have some fun. And, if you're angry about something, just kind of brush it off and be respectful to the judge.
Yep.
And your opponent.
And then you can contest it if you still have that problem and then move on. But definitely, you don't want a judge that doesn't like you, because that's also not a good place to be. One of the number one tips I always like to recommend to new players when they haven't had a lot of practice playing competitive Magic is pay attention to the clock. One of the things you can do when you're deciding where to sit for your match, if you arrive at the table first, I would always sit in the seat that looks at the clock, because then you can be very mindful of how much time is available. And oftentimes that's super important as to whether or not you're going to be getting a draw or a win.
Yeah, that's a super good point. A lot of players, especially new players, are not often mindful of the clock, and like intentional draws are a thing. Like you can, yeah, I remember when I first started, I would get tons of intentional draws, and I would always wonder why. I was like, oh man, my opponents are slow. But no, I was slow. I was not paying attention to the clock. And once I became more mindful of that, and I actually also received the tip of sit in the seat that faces the clock. And once I started doing that, I was like actually like a lot more mindful, playing a lot more quickly. So awesome tip.
Yeah, so those are two things that you guys can do just before the game starts without anything to do that will actually just make your life a lot easier. So the next thing we wanted to jump into a little bit is things that you can kind of do to prepare to help you throughout your day. That will, not necessarily the gameplay itself, but make you a better player throughout the day. And one of the things I think we start with, especially for limited, is make sure you take a screenshot or a picture of your deck list. When you submit a deck list, especially in limited, you have to register it. And oftentimes throughout the day, you might sideboard and kind of forget what was where. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good tip. When I started playing, there were not camera phones or whatever, so I couldn't really do this. And believe me, I made this mistake a lot where I would sideboard and forget. And then I would have to ask the judge, hey, can I see my deck list because I forgot what was in my main deck? Eventually I started learning a lot better about how to memorize them, but that's a different topic. But yeah, super important to make sure your deck is in its proper state before you go to your next game.
Yeah, and if you sideboard one or two things out, especially in a limited sealed format, it's super easy to remember. But a lot of times your sideboarding can be a lot more complicated in that if you play against a person who's very aggressive, you might just board in a bunch of 1/4s. And then you have these cards kind of hanging out on the outside of your deck that you're like, I know was in my deck, but I don't know what to take out. So just having that picture is super important.
Yeah, actually another thing that has come up with me a ton of times is I build my seal deck, I lose the first round, and I'm like, wow, my deck is terrible. And then I lay out my deck and I'm like, I should have played this color. So then what you end up doing is you make a sideboard plan of how to side into the correct deck for games 2 and 3. And that's really complicated. And you have to do it fast too. You only have 3 minutes to sideboard, So yeah, you have to sideboard into the right deck and then put the deck back into its proper configuration later. So yes, very important. And I have done that before plenty of times. I'm like, man, I should have played this color, and even made day 2 as a result after I figured out what the correct deck is.
Another interesting one to think of before you start your gameplay, which again will just help you throughout the day, is new sleeves, and also make sure you guys are having extra sleeves. This isn't usually a problem because a lot of packs are in 100, but sometimes you have just those 40 packs of sleeves, or if you get one of the 80 packs, you can split with a friend. But then it's harder to sideboard, which takes a little bit more time. If you have a card you're frequently siding in, you might want to have that pre-sleeved. But also it's really, really convenient if you do have to make a color change, like Melissa was saying, was that you have your 10 or 15 cards, including a fresh set of lands, ready to go. And you just kind of pick out the stuff you don't want, shuffle in the new pile, and you go. But again, it is hard to reset, so make sure you guys are paying attention to what is in your deck.
Yep, and moving on...
Oh, one more thing about the sleeves is new sleeves are very important, because if you have any sort of markings or dents in the corner of your sleeves, you could get gameplay penalties. Another really cool thing to do if you are mindful of your sleeves, every single time I go to a new event, I take a fresh set and I use that for my big competitive play tournament, and then I downgrade those sleeves to my everyday draft sleeves at the card store. Keep those in a box and use them over and over and over again, but you're a lot less worried about little nicks.
Yeah, for sure. That's actually a really good tip to save money on sleeves. When I played, I didn't have a ton of money, and I was always like, man, GP, do I actually need new sleeves? And I would go back and forth of should I buy new sleeves? But you should buy new sleeves.
You should.
Yeah, they're really important to just have a fresh set of sleeves. Make sure there's no nicks or no like scratches or anything. And they get gross. so yeah, buy new sleeves, downgrade the old sleeves to the LGS, or just, to sleeve random excess cards and stuff.
I have a competitive box and I have my like local draft store box, and one has like my old grimy sleeves or whatever, and then I just downgrade those. So that'll keep you at peak top competitive, level gameplay there with your sleeves, while also being mana or money efficient there. Another thing I wanted to briefly touch on is similar art. Now I know that a lot of the pros have a lot of strong feelings about this. So Melissa, you want to tell us about similar art?
Yeah, sure. So first we'll talk about limited. You'll often see a lot of professional players play cool basic lands. Now, what's important about these cool basic lands? They are all the same art. And the reason why that's important is because it makes it harder for your opponent to deduce what you have in your hand when all of these artworks are the same. For example, let's say that you have 4 different arts on your planes. They thought seize you, and you show them the 4 different arts. Later in the game, you play a different planes that they didn't see. Well, now they have more information that they would not have had otherwise. So that's why that's important for limited. And constructed is actually like really similar as well. And I actually have a funny story about this. Back when I first started playing, I used to love foreign cards. Like, I thought they were so cool. And I used to just try and get the most different languages that I could. So this one play set of cards I had in a GP once, it was like I had a German, I had a Japanese, I had a Korean, and maybe I had an English. And I was playing against Zvi Mauschwitz, who is a Hall of Fame player, doesn't really play anymore, but he was my opponent, and he was a really good player. And he duressed me, and he saw my 2 foreign cards that were different. Later on in the game, I played a different foreign card, and he was like, you really should play all the same art, because now I know that you have those other 2 still in your hand. And I was like, oh, man, what have I done? So I had to kind of rethink everything at that point. But yeah, that's like a good reason why it's important to play those same arts, just so your opponent just has less information.
Yeah, I actually have never had like a gotcha moment that way. I will say I think it is less important in limited, just because there are a lot fewer things that actually look at your opponent's hand. So, if you can't find those basic lands, it's not the end of the world. You'll still be okay. But and when I'm at my local card store, I do not hold myself to that standard at all. But typically,
I don't either.
But when I go into a Grand Prix or something like that, or my draft at the Pro Tour, my draft deck box I got 100 sleeves and sleeved up 10 of every land of the exact same art. And then I had the other 50 sleeves in the box. That also helps you because you have a very limited amount of time to build your deck. And oftentimes you go right down to the wire and you need to get your lands sleeved up as well. You need to submit your list in like day 2 for the draft. And having those lands pre-sleeved and ready to go is super easy and convenient. And then that way you make sure all your lands match too. So now that we've gone over just a couple of quick tips that you guys can do when getting ready to play some Magic at a competitive event, let's talk about the things you guys can actually do when you're in the game. Things that will just help you have smooth transitions and minimize judge calls. Melissa, you want to kick us off with a tip?
Yeah, sure. So before we even get into the game, let's talk about the pregame. Always shuffle your deck and your opponent's deck. I like to think that everybody has good intentions, but it's always just a good tip to just shuffle your opponent's deck anyway. And it's also required at competitive levels to shuffle your opponent's deck. And it's really easy, especially when time is a consideration. They cracked a fetch land or something. It's like, oh, we're running low on time. You're good. I won't cut or shuffle. But I would recommend against that. You should just always shuffle anyway, even if it's super quick, because, you don't know what your opponent's up to or what they're going to do. It's just a good rule of thumb to just do.
Yeah, I actually, when I was playing and grinding a lot of Magic, I had a sort of a muscle memory thing. So you do the pile shuffle for your deck. And then for my opponent's deck, I always shuffled 4 times and then put it on the table and then cut. That was sort of my little tradition. And getting into like a muscle habit like that is really, really good. I will say I do think I saw an announcement at the start of the pandemic saying that they removed the must shuffle from the rules. So I don't know if that's a thing. And I don't know if people moving forward will maybe be a little weird about that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point, because COVID maybe changed things, because maybe now we don't feel comfortable having other people touch our decks, right? So don't really know. That's something that everybody should ask judges beforehand. Maybe the tournament organizer will announce that beforehand. But if it is still allowed, still something that I will recommend.
And I think that we will hear, now that we're starting to get back into competitive Magic, I'm sure this is a topic that will come up. And there will be a general rule or a common courtesy type thing that will come of it, and we'll know a little bit more moving forward. But I 100% agree, shuffling is always super important. The last thing about shuffling is I would always recommend you pile shuffle. For me, for limited, because I pile shuffle in the same way every time, I know if I'm a card over or a card under because I end my last card in the same place every time. So sometimes I leave in a sideboard card or, so I put my cards back in and take out the cards that I think I should remove and I miss one. That just happens. Or sometimes you accidentally kept your opponent's something. Or
you dropped a card on the floor while shuffling.
Stuff like that happens, so I always recommend pile shuffling in a way that helps you remember what's going on. I personally do 3 up top, 3 on the bottom, and the way that it works out when I'm all done with a limited deck is that I end with the bottom right. So if I have an extra card in my hand or I didn't make it there, I know that there's a problem.
Yep. Yeah, really good tip, and yeah, it's definitely something I agree with.
All right, so the next thing we wanted to touch on really briefly is paper life totals. I have been to a couple of Paper Magics post-COVID, and I've seen some arena babies just using their phone, even at high-level competitive play, at that first Vegas GP. And I think that that's probably not the smartest.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a record of every life total change, because if any problems arise and you have a discrepancy in life totals, you can always go back. Oh, here's my record. You attacked me for 3 here, you attacked me for 1 here, I cracked a fetch here, so my life total is this. And also, if you guys ever have to call a judge because you have a discrepancy in life totals, the person who has the accurate record of the game is the person who is more likely that the judge is going to agree with.
And you say the accurate version, and the funny thing is it might not be the accurate version, but it's the version that they will believe because there is a actual receipt as to what the life total should be.
For sure. And also it's if you have dice or a phone, it's really easy to knock over a die or
hit it one too many times.
Exactly. Yeah. And that doesn't happen with pen and paper.
Absolutely. The next thing we wanted to touch briefly on was announce every single thing you do and let them respond to the things you do. I know that a lot of people cast their draw spell and immediately take cards right off the top without letting their opponent announce whether that's going to resolve. Now, you don't need to be super diligent or super slow, and once you get into the game, get through game 1, you'll get sort of a rhythm with your opponent and you'll kind of get their gestures a little bit, but just be extra cautious to learn those first because you can get some gameplay penalties for that.
Yeah, my recommendation is just communicate everything, communication is so important in Magic, and if you communicate clearly everything that you're doing, it's less likely that your opponent is going to not understand the game state or what's going on. So yeah, strongly recommend that. Announcing every phase of the game is a bit much. It might take too much time, but there are some phases that are just really important to announce clearly, specifically declaring attackers. If you just, tap your creatures and your opponent's like, hold on, I wanted to respond to you. You just lost a bunch of information. They just gained a lot of information is what I mean. So you want to really be okay, I am ready to go to combat, see what they do, and then do your thing.
On the same side of that, the opposite side of that same coin is make sure that you are being clear with your opponent when you want them to yield back priority. So for example, if you want to kill a creature on their upkeep so that way they have to counter it on their turn to eat up their mana, you can say, I am done, but I would like to respond before you draw your card.
Yeah, awesome.
So
love that.
Being clear going into combat, also being clear that you want them to stop because it's your turn. A lot of times they just snap draw a card, especially if they don't have anything to untap. So it's a little unfair, and you could get some ankle shooting type things going on there. So just be very clear.
Yep. Okay. This reminds me of a story.
I love story time.
And also I don't know, this might be just a humble brag, but I used to play Vintage when I was still new to the game, but I had power, and I remember going to a tournament, and I was paired up against a very good player who was one of the top Vintage players or whatever. So I was like, okay, here we go. All right, 3 Moxes. And the guy was like, wait a minute, hold on. you have to put a spell on the stack. And I was like, oh. So I like picked up all the mocks and I was like, mock sapphire. And he was like, okay, it resolves. And long story short, they all resolved, but like he just gave me so much crap for just throwing all my mocks on the board.
That is a little bit of a humble brag. I have never owned any power, but I would like to, because
it was a different time back then in the early 2000s.
Fair. Yeah, back when things were, a little bit more reasonably priced. I don't think we had baseball players wearing moxes around their neck at like special events.
Sure.
That actually happened. That's a real thing. Hunter Pence wore a graded Black Lotus.
All right,
around
that's
his
a
neck.
humble brag.
Yeah, to an official like baseball thing. It was like with a chain.
All right, so maybe it wasn't a humble brag because did the other players know what it was?
Probably not. But the funny thing is it was more expensive than any diamond necklace he could probably buy.
Okay,
It was
great.
The nerd community knew what a brag it was. All right, moving to our final tip for you guys. Don't be afraid to, practice magic. Be very mindful of the things that you're doing and how you can use things like dice or how you position your cards to help you with gameplay.
Yeah, like one of the things that we were talking about earlier about this was for upkeep triggers. It's so common for the player to just untap and draw their card without even thinking about what their upkeep triggers are. But you are allowed to put objects on top of your deck to help remember your triggers. So you go to draw your card, there's a die there, you're like, oh, I'm going to remember to pay for this pact, which is like, that trigger literally loses you the game. It's not really something that you want to miss.
But if you accidentally draw your card and you were like, oh, I was going to pay it, that doesn't
lose
matter.
The game.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, I remember one of the GPs where packs were constructed at the time, I would just put a big pile of dice on top of the deck just to make sure I didn't mess up.
Another, slightly similar idea, but one of the things I like to do is organize my cards in such a way that helps me remember my things. So for example, if you have like an end of turn pinger, so if you've got a little like dork that pings at the end of turn, I put that farthest to the right. So that way, as I'm going to draw my card, I see it right next to the deck. If you have it off to the side up on the left-hand corner, it's a lot easier to miss.
Yeah. I also always scan the board before, when my opponent says go, I will scan the board, make sure there's nothing that I want to do before untapping.
Yeah, and then just, making sure that your stuff is oriented in a way that just, helps you see. I think that's super important. All right, Melissa, so to wrap this video up, I want to ask you, we've gone over how to prepare, how to play, how to, sort of maximize all of those things. Do you have a tip going to a big Magic event where you play Magic for 9 to 10 hours that isn't on this list? What's your number one friend-to-friend advice?
Yeah, so my advice would be to go with your gut, and what that mostly means is it can be, time-consuming to just kind of, agonize over this play, or agonize over that final sideboard slot, or, what thing do I target? You can just take forever on those kind of plays, and those really do eat up a lot of clock time and a lot of stress. So, usually the thing that is your first gut reaction is a fine thing to do. That doesn't mean don't think about plays. Definitely think about plays. But if you're just if it's 1 a.m. and you're just man, do I play this card or this card is my 15th sideboard slot? It probably matters a lot less than the amount of stress and lack of sleep that it's causing you.
Yeah, also cards like Expressive Iteration has a similar idea where if you are taking max time on every single iteration cost, it'll probably give you more game draws than making a wrong decision. Once, or you know what I mean? If you're going to make the right decision most of the time, but you end up drawing it out every time, I feel like that kind of is a net negative for you.
It really adds up.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a very subtle way, because you don't think about it when you're doing it. You're not thinking about it, man, I have to make a play. You're not thinking about that, but you do that so many times, and then suddenly you've drawn the game.
Yeah. My one piece of friendly advice for those of you guys traveling to your very first big event is bring snacks, bring water bottles. You will not likely want to pay the $5 for a bottle of water or more, so you'll get dehydrated. And also, a lot of times you do not There are no lunch breaks. So if your games go long or if your opponents are slow, you can't go get food. My friends and I have like sort of a little rule that whoever loses or wins first goes and gets coffee, goes and gets lunch. Like It's like we're all
You have great friends.
Yeah. So there's a Subway next door to the convention. Whoever is out first goes on the run. And that's kind of our thing, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. And you start to make some gameplay errors if you are fatigued, dehydrated, and hungry. So having something, just access to something. I usually bring like a cookie or some pretzels. A lot of people bring like nuts or beef jerky.
Cliff Bar. Cliff Bar was always my go-to. I always had a Cliff Bar as my lunch because, let's be honest, you don't have time to eat lunch.
Yeah, not unless you have some sort of system where, the scrub out person kind of helps out, which is nice.
Oh no, yeah. The scrub out person.
Someone's got to
do it.
Sad. Someone definitely has to do it. All right, guys, that wraps up our next episode of Brainstorm Buddies.
All right, that was awesome. I really enjoyed talking about that. I miss playing in competitive tournaments, so it was really good to like go back and think about all the things that I used to think about all the time.
Definitely. If you guys enjoyed the content, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get notifications for all of our future episodes. And again, all the ad revenue and everything does go to the National Abortion Fund. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys share it with your friends. It's going to go towards a wonderful cause. And don't forget to leave us a comment down below with your topic suggestions as well as your charity suggestions.
Yes, we want to hear all the feedback and all the topic suggestions and charity suggestions, all the things.
Because we don't want to come up with them ourselves.
Well, I wasn't going to go that far, but like, okay, I can't argue with that.
Until next time, guys. Thanks for watching.
Bye.